Hey film buffs, welcome back to Film Feature 43, and happy holidays. We made it to December. You can listen to Mariah Carey on repeat and decorate your house however you'd like without the fear of somebody belittling you for decorating too early. To kick off this holiday season, I wanted to take a trip back all the way to 1994, where Michael Jordan was a baseball player, Boyz II Men wanted to make love to you, and Tim Allen was on top of the world with a best-selling book, a #1 TV show, and a #1 movie at the box office. What was the movie, you might ask? As if you already didn't know from the title and thumbnail of this video. Well, you silly goose, it was the holiday classic, The Santa Claus. I know everybody and their mother has talked about the Santa Claus on YouTube and has made videos about it, but I'm new to YouTube. I haven't given my 2 cents, and there is one scene in particular that is weird to me that nobody that I've seen has really talked about. So let's pour ourselves a cup of hot cocoa and talk about the gem of 90s nostalgia that is Tim Allen's The Santa Claus. So we start off this film with how every Christmas movie should start, and that is an office Christmas party. And at this holiday Christmas party, we get, well, at best, adultery, at worst, office sexual harassment. In this line,
in all seriousness, here at B&R Toys, we're not just about making a profit in quality toys. We're also about families. But our families aren't here with us right now. That's probably why Johnson's secretary's sitting in his lap.
And the man delivering that line is none other than our protagonist, Scott Calvin. And to put it bluntly, Scott Calvin is a terrible father. How do we know that Scott's a terrible father? Well, he's late picking up his kid, and burns Christmas dinner, and takes his kid to the worst product placement in the history of film. They go to Denny's, and this Denny's doesn't have chocolate milk, it doesn't have eggnog, it doesn't have pie. I'm frankly surprised that they have seats for the characters to sit in. If Denny's paid for this product placement, the marketing team was probably pretty upset. Anyway, after their delicious Denny's Christmas meal, the Calvin boys go back home, read the night before Christmas, and are woken by a bump on the housetop.
Somebody's on the roof.
And they rush outside to see who it is, and to no one's surprise, it's Santa Claus. But to everyone's surprise, Santa takes a swan dive off the roof and subsequently disappears.
Dad! He disappeared!
After waving goodbye to Scott and a ladder magically appearing, Tim, the toy man Taylor, decides to put on Santa's coat, get in the sleigh, and they end up going house to house, delivering toys, destroying property, you know, the things that Santa does, and they wind up ending up at the North Pole. We find out from this itty-bitty fine print that because Scott put on Santa's coat, he is now the new Santa Claus. I'm no lawyer, but I do have a lawyer friend, and I talked to him about this fine print thing, because in my mind, there's no way that fine print that small that's on that business card would enact a binding contract. My friend said that it varies from state to state. They're in Illinois, and I looked it up, and it seems like it's the determination of the judge in Illinois, where it has to be reasonable to a rational person of what size the fine print is and what font it is to make it legible. And I am a rational, reasonable person, and I say that fine print does not get my stamp of approval. There's no way that he can be bound to the contract where he gains 25 to 30 pounds in a night, 45 pounds in a week, and his entire appearance changes. And the 45 pounds that he gains in a week isn't even as big as he gets. Scott gains probably at least 70 pounds. He loses his kid because his wife thinks that he's doing this on purpose, gaining all this weight and having his hair turn gray to get at her.
I never thought you would stoop to changing your physical appearance in order to make Charlie like you.
Which is really selfish, and it makes him fear for his health, gaining all this weight. And him fearing for his health leads him to go to the doctors, and the doctor is the worst doctor in the history of medical practice. Scott gains 45 pounds in a week, and he just says,
well, then there is your problem. Just try to cut back on the sweets, okay?
And he listens to Scott's heart, and it's playing Jingle Bells, And he doesn't call a cardiologist immediately to come down there because this guy's having heart palpitations. It's very odd. And there's no way that fine print on that card would be able to bind Scott to all these things. And can we talk about the process of choosing a Santa? I mean, it almost has to be predetermined because there's no other job in the history of the world that if you take somebody's coat, automatically you become that person's job. It's not like the CEO of a business goes to an opera and gives his coat to the coat check, and the coat check puts on his coat and now becomes the CEO of Amazon. That's not how jobs work. So, honestly, being Santa Claus has to be predetermined, I would assume. Anyway, back on track. Scott and Charlie arrive at the North Pole, and this is the weirdest scene in the entire movie. Aside from the fine print thing, it's weird for a couple reasons for me. The first is Scott and Charlie waltz in, and Scott's the new Santa, and none of the elves seem to care that the old Santa is dead. And the second reason that's weird to me, and it's the reason that I made this video, if nobody talks about, is where is the old Santa's Mrs. Claus? We find out in the Santa Claus 2 that in order to become Santa and be Santa, you have to have a Mrs. Claus before the de-Santification process happens. So where is the old Kris Kringle's wife? There's only a few things that could have happened to lead to there not being a Mrs. Claus. Either the first thing, there was never a Mrs. Claus because he was never married, which means he's probably a new Santa. It takes 8 years from the first Santa Claus to the second Santa Claus before he has to find a wife. So maybe he was Santa for 1 to 8 years and never really found a Mrs. Claus. And I guess that could explain why the elves don't really care, because it was just some schmuck who showed up a couple years ago. They don't really have that attachment to the old Santa Claus. And that could kind of explain why he's so bad at the job to fall off the roof in the first place. The second thing that I guess could have happened is Mrs. Claus pieced out and didn't want to be Mrs. Claus anymore. So that means that Santa had to relinquish his Santahood, so he decided to swan dive off the roof. But to me, there's a couple ways around that. Either Santa could have found a new wife, or used his Santa magic to swoon his old wife, or used the snow globe we see in the third one to wish that he was never Santa to begin with.
Wished I'd never been Santa at all. Happy? I am now.
So maybe it's a little drastic for him to jump off the roof before choosing one of the other options. I mean, there are hints that this Santa isn't a very good Santa, or at least Santas before Scott weren't very good Santas. I mean, aside from not having a wife, and the elves not caring about him, and falling off the roof, somebody ticked off a young Neal and Laura to the point that they didn't believe in Santa anymore.
I was 3, and it was an Oscar Mayer weenie whistle. Christmas came, no weenie whistle. And that's when I stopped believing.
So, somewhere in the line there had to be a bad Santa, and maybe it was this Santa. Maybe he just sucked that bad, so his wife decided to leave him. Also, we see Comet giving Scott a rope as the second time of him being Santa, so he doesn't fall off the roof, and he never gave that to the old Santa, or maybe the old Santa just didn't want to use it because he knew he was better than that, and his hubris is what killed him. Who knows? There's a severe lack of caring about previous Santas in this world, and that's a little troubling to me. Maybe I'm thinking about it too much, and Santa's just a terrible boss, so that's why the elves didn't care that he was gone. The third scenario that could have happened is maybe being Mrs. Claus is like being the first lady, and as soon as your husband dies, you gotta vacate the premises for the next guy to come in, which is a little dark. I mean, there's two scenarios kind of sub underneath there, like sub 3, she learns of her husband's death and then is kicked out of the North Pole the same day. It's like you see the elves going,
Alright, lady, your husband's dead, and you gotta get out of here for the new guy. Them's the rules.
Or sub 3, she knew that her husband was going to die because he had it planned, and so she had everything packed ready to go for when that news came in. She could just leave the North Pole without making a fuss, which again is also dark. But I mean, I guess that could be why the elves had come to terms with it so fast, because they knew it was going to happen, and why Santa waves before disappearing. I guess that could be a possibility. But speaking of disappearance, is there like an afterlife for Santas where all the previous Santas go, kind of like the Kings in Black Panther? Or do they become one kind of with the Santa Force, kind of like in Star Wars, and they can show up as Santa Force ghosts? The disappearance is really odd to me. You'd think that the body would still be there. I don't know how the Santa magic works, I guess is what I'm getting at. But the disappearance thing kind of leads me into the fourth scenario, and probably the most horrific scenario is maybe Mrs. Claus, Marty McFly's out of existence, like her husband, after he dies. I mean, that would be terrifying. She's there cooking dinner or teaching some of the elves, and then just poof, she's gone. Which leads me to another thing. Mr. and Mrs. Claus have a little Claus in the third movie. So do the kids disappear too after Santa Claus dies? Just the whole family just poof, never existed? Now I'm sad. Alright, we gotta move on. It's not just Charlie's parents in this film that act strangely. We have a soccer scene where Scott is sitting on a bench looking like Santa Claus, and a bunch of kids line up to sit on his lap and tell them what they want for Christmas. Mind you that there are people wearing short sleeves in this park, so it's probably September. So the best of the parents' knowledge of the kids that are lining up, some off-duty mall Santa is sitting in a park 4 months before Christmas, and no one calls the cops, or Bess goes up and says something to the guy. That's odd to me. Also, no parents ever question where the gifts come from Santa. Like, Laura and Neal never wonder where the gifts from Charlie are coming from that say Santa on them, because they're both staunch against telling Charlie that there's a Santa. So, do kids whose parents don't believe in Santa just not get gifts given to them? So there's not that confusion. And speaking of gifts from Santa, he's given things like kayaks, which no parent could overlook. But at one time we see a live dog in the sack. Whose house was that going to? How do parents not wake up in the morning and realize that there's a live dog that neither one of them bought? Dogs are a big time commitment and monetary expense. The parents are going to know that they didn't buy the thing. So Santa probably ruined their marriage, because they're just going to keep fighting that the wife thinks the husband bought it and the husband thinks the wife bought it, and neither one of them are going to admit that it was Santa Claus. And also, did the elves make that dog? Can the elves make dogs with magic? Like, there's a lot of questions about adding that dog to Santa's sack that I don't think the filmmakers were ready to answer. So anyway, all these changes that Scott go through and his weird behavior makes Laura fight for sole custody of Charlie, and she wins because Scott looks crazy. Scott decides to show up on Christmas Eve to say goodbye to Charlie and essentially kidnaps him. And by essentially, I mean literally. He literally kidnaps Charlie and takes him to the North Pole. The police are called, Santa's arrested, to the sheer horror of these children watching it happen. Charlie is then picked up by this not creepy at all
Charlie?
Yeah?
Don't worry. We're the good guys.
special elf squad to go bust Scott out of prison. Which also leads me to have a few more questions. We see the head elf Bernard disappear and reappear at will, so why doesn't Santa have that power to be able to get out of prison? We also see that the elves tie up the one prison guard, and Charlie shoves a full donut in his mouth. That guy's probably dead, right? He probably choked on that donut. Like, that was a mean-spirited thing for Charlie to do. He should probably be on the naughty list for that. The third thing about this is there are no news crews outside the Miller household to cover the story of the kidnapped child and the deranged father who thinks he's Santa Claus. Fourth and final, like 100 people see Santa Claus fly away from the Miller household, and then they all leave within like 20 minutes, never badgering the Millers for their connection to Santa Claus. And on top of that, no one knows later in the movies that Scott is Santa Claus. Like, nobody knows Santa Claus exists. There's, I think, maybe a Russian plane, I'm not sure what nationality it was, flying over the North Pole in the second one, and they have to be quiet because nobody can know Santa Claus exists. But Santa Claus flies in full view of about 100 people at the end of this film, and nobody even bats an eye at that. The word would have traveled around to what people saw that night, right? All in all, I'd give it a 10 out of 10, would watch again, because I do every single year. It's one of my favorite Christmas movies, and realistically, it is a little weird. Some scenes don't make any sense, but isn't that what Christmas is all about? Being a little weird, doing things like cutting down a tree and leaving the dead carcass in the middle of your living room for a month. Being a little weird like that, isn't that what Christmas is really about? I mean, spending time with your family, as long as you don't have to kidnap them, and ultimately burning Christmas dinner and having a poorly put together Denny's product placement dinner. That's really what Christmas is all about. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.